Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to cut through the noise, stack up some really fascinating sources, and get right to the heart of what you need to know. Today, we are plunging into something that feels genuinely transformative. It's about how we organize ourselves, how we govern things together, and even how we fund big ideas, especially in the world of science. We're talking decentralized autonomous organizations. You probably hear them called DAOs, and this really interesting application in a field popping up called decentralized science, or DeSci.
Exactly. And our goal today, our mission, if you like, is to get past the buzzwords. We want to understand what DAOs actually are, how they really function, and then look at some surprising ways they're being used, particularly in science. We'll explore the potential, which is frankly immense, but also touch on the real challenges they face.
Right, it's not all hype, and we've got some great material to work with.
Yeah, we really do. We're drawing from a pretty detailed report from the Belfer Center at Harvard Kennedy School, the ones focused on DAOs and U.S. policy. We've also got insights from Binance, looking specifically at DES, how it's aiming to revolutionize research. Plus, a study from Frontiers that explores the whole DeSci ecosystem, some practical guides on how researchers can actually get funding from a DeSci DAO, and articles from Edited and Honest Government Services looking at blockchain's role in scientific workflows and keeping data trustworthy. So, good mix.
Okay, fantastic. So let's dive right in. DAOs. You hear this term, like you said, a lot, especially in tech circles. Sometimes it sounds exciting, sometimes just confusing. Fundamentally, what are we talking about here? What is a DAO?
It's the perfect place to start. And you're right, there isn't one single definition everyone agrees on, but the Belfer Center report gives us a really solid working one. They define DAOs as global, digitally native organizations. They coordinate and govern shared resources and activities, and the key part is they use smart contracts on blockchains to do it.
Digitally native smart contracts. So instead of like a CEO and a board making decisions.
Exactly. Think of it less like a traditional hierarchy and more like rules baked directly into computer code. And that code automatically executes decisions when certain conditions are met. No human manager needed to push the button, so to speak.
Okay, so the code is kind of the manager. But how big is this? Is it just a few experimental groups, or is this really taking off?
Oh, it's definitely taking off. The Belfer Center called it explosive growth. They estimated that since 2020, we saw something like 6,000 DAOs pop up by mid-2022. And collectively, get this, they were managing treasuries worth around $25 billion.
Wow, 25 billion managed by .code. That's pretty mind-blowing.
It is. It's happened incredibly fast.
And you mentioned digitally native, but this idea of people pooling resources, making decisions together, that feels familiar, right? Like cooperatives. How do DAOs relate to that older idea?
Yeah, that's a really insightful connection. The Belfer Center report actually draws that parallel quite strongly. DAOs and traditional cooperatives often share these core values, inclusivity, participation, maybe as a reaction against economic inequality.
Right, more democratic control.
Exactly. The big difference is the mechanism. Traditional co-ops use human agreements, bylaws, meetings. They often prioritize efficiency. DAOs embed the rules in smart contracts on a blockchain. This prioritizes transparency and decentralized collaboration. Sometimes that means they might be a bit slower for certain decisions, but the focus is different. It's a different way to think about governing shared efforts.
A different philosophy, almost. Okay, you mentioned the tech bits, smart contracts, wallets, tokens. For folks listening who follow this stuff but maybe aren't coders, can you quickly break down how those pieces make a DAO, well, autonomous?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the autonomous heart is the smart contract. Think of it like a digital vending machine. You put in the input, and the code automatically executes the agreement, maybe releasing funds, recording a vote, whatever the contract says. If the DAO votes yes on funding, the smart contract just does it automatically.
Okay. If this, then that, but enforced by the blockchain. Got it.
Precisely. Then you have wallets. These are just secure digital addresses for holding crypto assets. But DAOs often use something called multi-signature wallets or multi-sigs for their treasuries. This means maybe 3 out of 5 designated people have to digitally sign off before any funds can be moved. It adds a big layer of security, prevents one person from running off with the money,
Right. Safety in numbers, digitally.
Yeah. And finally, tokens. These are the crypto assets, the DAO issues. They can do a lot of things. They can give you voting rights on proposals. They can act like a key, sometimes called token gating, to get into private channels or access resources. They can represent a kind of fractional ownership in whatever the DAO holds. And they're often used to incentivize people, like paying out bounties and tokens for completing specific tasks the DAO needs done. These three things, smart contracts, wallets, tokens working together, that's the engine of a DAO.
That makes it much clearer. It's a whole system for collective action built on code. Okay, so we get the concept, we get the tech. But where are DAOs actually making a difference? What are some surprising real-world uses beyond just, crypto speculation?
Right, this is where it gets really interesting. The Belfer Center highlights a few powerful examples. One big one is fractionalized ownership and control. Imagine being able to co-own a tiny piece of something valuable. Maybe a patent for a new drug, a piece of digital art, even a plot of land with a group of people anywhere in the world, instantly.
Without all the usual lawyers and paperwork?
Exactly. DAOs make it possible for groups to collectively own and manage assets like that, opening up investment opportunities for people who might only have a small amount to put in.
Right.
It cuts down massively on the usual administrative and legal friction, especially across borders. It really democratizes access.
That's huge. Lowering the barrier to entry. What about less financial stuff? Can DAOs help people organize for, social causes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're proving incredibly effective for communities and collective action.
Yeah.
Think about mutual aid networks, but supercharged and global. A really powerful example the Belfer Center mentions is Ukraine DAO. It literally self-organized within days of the full-scale invasion in February 2022.
Wow.
Yeah. And it quickly became a major donor, funneling something like $4 million to a Ukrainian charity called Come Back Alive that supports the armed forces. And they didn't stop there. They helped with the Kyiv Tech Summit. They even submitted the first ever cryptographic dossier of potential war crimes evidence to the International Criminal Court, all organized decentrally.
That is incredibly powerful. Real impact, organized on the fly in a crisis. You also mentioned resilient operations. What does that mean for a DAO's survival? How do they stay stable?
Resilience comes from that decentralized structure. Take MakerDAO, for example. It's a big one in decentralized finance. The Belfer Center notes that after initially having a central foundation help build it, MakerDAO completely dissolved that foundation in 2021. All the governance, the huge treasury, everything was transferred to the DAO itself, run by its token holders. Its smart contracts automatically manage collateral to keep its stablecoin pegged to the US dollar.
So the system just keeps running.
In theory, yes. The core protocol, the dollar peg mechanism, could keep functioning even if, all the human members stop participating for a while. Because the rules are locked into that autonomous code on the blockchain. That's a kind of operational resilience you just don't see in traditional organizations.
Okay, so DAOs are changing finance, enabling rapid collective action, creating resilient systems. It makes you wonder, where else could this model really shake things up? A field that seems ripe for disruption, often criticized for being slow and inefficient, is scientific research. And that's where DeSci comes in, right? Decentralized science.
Exactly. And to really get why DeSci is potentially so revolutionary, you first have to appreciate the headaches researchers deal with in the traditional system. Binance lays out some of the big ones. You've got major funding bottlenecks, fierce competition for scarce grants, really long, complex application process.
Oh yeah, the grant writing nightmare.
Yeah, totally. Then there's restricted access. So much vital research ends up locked behind expensive journal paywalls, which really slows down progress and global collaboration. Plus, you have serious peer review flaws, issues with bias, it's often slow, not very transparent. And finally, data silos. Researchers often can't or won't share data easily because of security worries or just lack of infrastructure.
Those are deep systemic problems. So how does DeSci even begin to tackle all that? What's the vision?
Well, the Frontier study defines DeSci as this collaborative, decentralized movement using all these tools, blockchain, Web3, crypto, DAOs. The vision is pretty bold. It's about enabling, and I'm quoting loosely here, permissionless, open, and inclusive participation, facilitating collective governance, fair incentives, open access, shared ownership, and transparent funding for the whole scientific process.
Okay, so hitting all those pain points we just mentioned.
Right. It aims to challenge things like the reputation economy in science, where metrics like citation counts sometimes overshadow actual research quality. It takes aim at the academic publishing model, the one where public funds pay for research, journals get a fee, charge authors to publish, and then charge institutions fortunes to access it.
The infamous triple dipping.
Exactly. And DeSci also wants to address the replication crisis, the worrying fact that many published findings can't be reproduced by other labs, which wastes resources and erodes trust.
That's a huge agenda. And how do DAOs fit in specifically as the funding engines for DeSci? That seems key.
It really is one of the core innovations. That is, DAOs are essentially becoming new funding bodies. They're governed by their token holders, and that could be anyone from big VCs to just regular people interested in a specific area of science. This diversifies where the money comes from and aims to make the funding process simpler and more transparent. We looked at a great practical guide, how to get your research funded by a DeSci DAO, and it gives real examples, like Vida DAO. They focus on longevity research. They've already funded over $4.2 million across more than 20 projects. That includes a $285,000 investment directly into research at Newcastle University.
So real university research getting funded through a DAO, not just theoretical.
Not at all. Real money, real science. And often in niche or emerging areas that might struggle to get traction with traditional grants.
Are there others? Other DeSci DAOs focused on specific fields?
Oh yeah, the ecosystem's growing. That funding guide mentions others like Research Hub, they're kind of general purpose, funding any science. Then you have Athena DAO for women's health, Valley DAO for synthetic biology, Cryo DAO looking at cryopreservation, SciAO for psychedelic research, even Hair DAO for hair loss research.
Hair DAO, okay, they're really getting specific.
They are. It shows how targeted these funding communities can become.
So if I'm a researcher listening, and this sounds interesting, how do I actually approach one of these DAOs for funding? Is it super complicated?
Actually, the guide lays out a pretty clear 4-step process. It seems designed to be more accessible. First, you basically join the community, find the DAO that fits your research area, get on their Discord or forum. Second, you submit your application, usually through their online platform. Third, there's a due diligence phase where experts within the DAO community review your proposal, ask questions, assess its merits, and finally it goes to a community vote. The token holders decide whether to fund it or not. It's much more direct and community-driven than traditional grant panels.
Interesting. A very different model. Okay, so we've talked organization, we've talked funding. What about the core blockchain tech itself? How does that improve the day-to-day scientific workflow? Things like peer review or just trusting the data?
Right, because it's not just about the DAO structure. The underlying blockchain technology offers tangible benefits. Editage has a good breakdown of how it could revolutionize peer review. We know traditional peer review can be, well, problematic, opaque, slow, sometimes biased. Blockchain offers a potential fix by creating a decentralized and immutable record of the whole process.
Immutable meaning tamper-proof, like a permanent record of who reviewed what and when.
Exactly. Editage points out several advantages. Transparency, you could potentially track the review process in near real time. Immutability, reviewers' comments are logged permanently, increasing accountability. Security, manuscripts and reviews can be stored securely. Decentralization reduces reliance on a single journal editor, potentially mitigating bias, and even incentivization. Reviewers could be rewarded with tokens or reputation points for good, timely reviews.
Rewarding reviewers, that's been talked about for ages.
Right, and projects are trying it. Editage mentions examples like Pluto, which uses reputation scores and reward tokens, and Orvium, which focuses on proof of existence for manuscripts and transparent reviewing.
That could fundamentally change how science validates itself. What about the data itself? You know, the old garbage in, garbage out problem. We generate so much data now. How does blockchain help make sure it's reliable?
That's absolutely critical. Onyx Government Services makes this point really well. The GIGO problem isn't new, but the sheer scale of data today makes it worse. Blockchain helps because of its basic nature. Distributed storage and decentralized processing. Data isn't just sitting on one server, vulnerable to failure or tampering. It's copied across many computers in the network. For change to be accepted, a majority of these computers have to agree. That makes unauthorized tampering extremely difficult. Onyx emphasizes this builds trust, prevents data manipulation, and helps manage how sensitive data is shared securely. Everyone can be sure they're working from the same verified data set.
Okay, so the potential seems enormous for funding, for organizing, for peer review, for data trust. But where are we really at with adoption? Is DeSci mainstream yet? And with all this disruption, surely there are legal and policy headaches?
Yeah, that's the reality check. The Frontier study gives us a good snapshot. It's interesting they found that while around 78% of DeSci projects they looked at have some kind of organizational structure, fewer than 30% actually use full-blown DAO features like token voting or fully autonomous finances yet.
Okay, so more like DAO-inspired or hybrid models.
Exactly. It suggests we're seeing more of a gradual evolution, maybe blending traditional structures with some decentralized elements rather than a complete sudden takeover. It's still early days.
That makes sense. What about the tech platforms? Is any one blockchain winning out in DeSci?
According to that Frontier study, Ethereum is definitely the leader right now, hosting about 48% of the single-chain projects they found. They suggest this is due to its large established community and maybe advocacy from figures like Vitalik Buterin, even though Ethereum can have higher transaction fees sometimes.
Interesting. And how are these DeSci projects funded overall? Is it all crypto tokens?
Not entirely. The study found a pretty balanced mix, actually. Grants, token sales, and traditional venture capital all play a role. About 27% were generating some revenue, but, and this is key, only 6% reported getting government funding. So that's a big gap, or maybe an opportunity.
Yeah. And the study also mentioned partnerships.
Yes, partnerships with traditional institutions, universities, research institutes seem really important. They help build trust and legitimacy, kind of bridging the gap between the old and new systems.
Okay, so it's an evolving landscape. But these new structures, these DAOs, they must create massive headaches for regulators, right? Especially being global and digital. What are the big policy question marks, particularly in the US?
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge area of uncertainty. The Belfer Center report lays out the main challenges very clearly. First, jurisdiction. Where is a global internet-native organization legally based? Whose laws apply? It's really unclear. Then, liability. This is a big one. If a DAO isn't formally registered as a specific legal entity, it might be treated as a general partnership in the eyes of the law.
Meaning the members could be personally liable if something goes wrong.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Each member could be on the hook for the DAO's debts or legal issues. That's a massive deterrent for people wanting to participate. Then there's taxation. Huge question marks around how DAO treasuries are taxed, how individuals report income from tokens or bounties. It's murky. And finally, the big ongoing debate. Are crypto tokens securities or commodities? How regulators classify tokens deeply impacts how DAOs can operate, issue tokens, and raise funds.
Wow. Okay, so a minefield of legal ambiguity. Have any U.S. states tried to create specific rules for DAOs?
A few have dipped their toes in. The Belfer Center mentions states like Wyoming, Vermont, Tennessee have passed DAO LLC laws, trying to give DAOs a recognized legal structure. But these laws often come with strings attached, like they might require DAOs to disclose the identities of their members, which goes against the preference for anonymity or pseudonymity that's pretty common in the space. So it's a trade-off.
A tricky balance. So what should policymakers be doing, according to the experts? How do you regulate this without stifling it?
The Belfer Center's main message seems to be, don't just try to force DAOs into old legal boxes. Policymakers need to understand their technical and operational uniqueness. They also argue the U.S. needs to provide much more legal clarity to retain domestic innovation. Right now, the uncertainty is pushing many DAOs to set up shop overseas. So they recommend a multi-pronged approach. Clarity from the federal level, especially in the securities question, more tailored adaptive laws at the state level, and encouraging the industry itself to develop best practices and standards. Ultimately, both the Belfer Center and the Frontier study seem to point towards a future of coexistence and collaboration. It won't likely be TradSci or DeSci, but probably both, influencing each other. We need to recognize the trade-offs as these models mature, balancing the ideals of decentralization with, the practical needs of getting things done.
This has been incredibly insightful. We've gone from the basics of what a DAO even is, this new way of organizing using code, to seeing how they're enabling fractional ownership, powering rapid response like Ukraine DAO, and creating these super resilient systems like MakerDAO. And then, wow, diving into DeSci, seeing how it aims to tackle really persistent problems in science, from funding bottlenecks and paywalls to flawed peer review and data integrity, using DAOs and blockchain as the tools.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? This raises a pretty big question for me. How might these decentralized, community-first ways of organizing, with all the transparency and direct voting, how might that bleed over into other parts of our lives? Beyond just finance and science, could it change, say, local governance, social movements? What happens when coordinating collective action is literally built into the software we use every day? What new possibilities open up?
That's a fantastic question to leave folks with. What happens when the organization is the code? Really makes you think. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of DAOs and DeSci. We hope it's given you a clearer view of these really dynamic and evolving spaces. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.